that, the second presentation is focused on local government function and jurisdictions, and provides, in some ways, an introduction to some of the presentations that are to come. Okay, I want to show you a series of maps, and in the chat section, if you don't mind, take a look at them and let me know what you see as relationships between these. So the first one is ecoregions. So that is different regions based on the soils, the geology, and plants and animals in the different areas. The second shows farm count and size. So the number in those graphics is the number of farms in each county, and the color from yellow being smaller farms, with blue to purple being larger farm size on average. The third is a population map of the state. And the last one is the percent of the households that have access to sewer systems. The red being a very low percent of the county that has access to sanitary sewer, and the blue being almost complete coverage. So give me some thoughts. What do you see as relationships between these maps and for implications for watershed planning? Here's one of the major issues. Yeah, great. I see urban to rural divide. That's a great comment. You know, one of the things I saw is that all planning must be local. Each one of these situations is very different land uses, very different hydrology and geomorphology, so how the water flows over the surface. The population is different. Very segmented planting we see. Yeah, 120 different counties. So how do you wrap your head around that? The zoning ordinances are different, and there's different priorities within each of these communities. So the watersheds themselves physically are different, but also the communities that are within them are very different as well. So when you approach each community, you need to think about, where does community happen, whether it be physically or virtually. Is it at the corner store, or is it through local newspapers, or is it via online discussion groups? You know, where does life organize around? How do people get their info? So this gets at questions of both like media forms as well as trust. So in some cases, a community that maybe most of the people watch local TV, you can use commercials to do outreach. But what about where there's a lot of cord cutters now? Local newspapers may be great sources of information, but what about those people that don't speak English, maybe as a primary language, or don't get the local paper? And then how do people evaluate trust? How are they likely to interpret information coming from maybe the Extension Service or Fish and Wildlife or the USDA versus the EPA? All these are relevant when you think about your communities and maybe sub-communities within them. Also, who makes decisions? Melissa talked quite a bit about that, but having that broad influence on the partners is important. What are the contentious issues? Something that happened 20 years ago can still affect individuals' responses and trust. So knowing those contentious issues can help you deal with it and not speak some of the hot button words or issues that can put people on edge. And then finally, what are the clubs and organizations that already exist, and where are opportunities, that low-hanging fruit within the community, where you can begin to show wins, or you can begin to piggyback your activities in order to gain a hold and build build capacity within an area. So as we think about local partners, we think that one of the unique things about watersheds is that they don't typically coincide with political or community boundaries. So cities and counties often have differing views on how things should be handled. Neighborhoods have different mechanisms of communication and engagement. There's different cultural norms within an area that can affect whether practices are adopted or not. And so, again, in building plans, you'll need to represent these various organizations and jurisdictions in your process. So the more you know about your communities, the better that you can engage them. And so in this presentation, we're going to cover some of the forms and functions of government, kind of giving an overview, delving into cities, counties, and then special districts, and then finally addressing some of the regional or multi-state authorities. Excuse me. So going back to our high school physics, we live in or civics, excuse me, we live in a federal system. And so federalism is a type of government in which the power is divided between national, state, and other government units. And so that contrasts with a unitary government in which the central authority holds all the power, and a confederation of states, for instance, in which the states are clearly dominant. So we have enumerated powers for the federal government and reserved powers for the state. And so that balance of power is constantly in flux on various situations, but that's the system within the United States. And so what that means is at a federal, state, and local powers, they're all constrained in different ways in how they are able to respond to situations and projects. And it's important because this affects at the state level as well as the local level. So when it comes to local authority, the National League of Cities has talked about 4 different broad categories of authority. One being structural, that's power to choose your own government. Functional, it's the ability to exercise local self-government, whether it be on a broad or limited manner. You have fiscal, which is can you raise taxes or determine your revenue sources. And the 4th would be personnel. So that'd be setting employment rules or rates or conditions or even collective bargaining. So out of that list, typically the fiscal authority is the most limited. So what we're going to see here is that the American Civil War had a lot of influence on local authority in the United States, as well as Kentucky, both in the past and in the present. Just a few years after the Civil War, John Dillon made 2 Supreme Court rulings in 1868, and they became known as Dillon's Rule. And this this very narrowly restricted local government authority to powers that were explicitly made known or implied or essential to their purpose. So if it wasn't stated, they did not have the power in those local situations. And so because of this, many states began to respond by issuing home rule, which would allow local municipalities to have governing authority. This began in the 1900s so that the local governments could have more of a say. These rules differ from state to state with different allowances within those 4 different categories. So every state's a little bit different. Functional powers are the most frequently used, expanded. And in Kentucky, Kentucky's counties, cities, and special districts had no powers except for those permitted by state laws under the 1891 Constitution, which is still currently in force until some recent rulings were made. So special or local legislation was originally prohibited under that state constitution. So again, 1891, that's only a generation after the Civil War, and Kentucky was a border state, so it was locked down on some of those local type issues. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that and see how it affects. But my point here being is local ordinances are a relatively recent occurrence in Kentucky, and there's not consistency from city to city on these ordinances. So when we speak about local authority, we're going to be using some terms about permitting, enforcement, and management. And sometimes there's confusion over who has jurisdiction or primacy. And so jurisdiction speaks of a granted or delegated authority. It's often thought about in terms of geography, but that's not always true. But it's the who has the legal power to act. And primacy it refers to the act of coming first. So who's the lead in this action? Um, so in terms of permitting, primacy or primary enforcement authority refers to those responsible for local enforcement authority. So local governments are granted primacy typically because they have been delegated authority from higher levels because of specific laws or their ability to govern in situations because of unique local conditions. In some cases, that primacy may not be given until certain criteria are met. And sometimes there's tensions in these primacy. There maybe on a federal level, a state may have specific local laws that may be preempted if the federal government passes a law over that. Or a local government may establish some pretty unique programs that can then later be preempted by state regulations. So there's a balance in jurisdiction and primacy between different powers. So here are some examples and ways that this plays out. In one case being a stream impact. So say you have the question, can I restore the stream using a natural channel design? Well, is it a water of the United States? In that case, the United States Army Corps of Engineers says, well, whatever you want to do, we want to stay. And so you have a jurisdictional determination. Is it within their jurisdiction? And the Kentucky Division of Water says, is this the water of a Commonwealth? We want to say in that too. And often these have the same type of jurisdiction, which is the reason why there's a 401, 404 permit that kind of goes together. Another instance of this would be construction site or erosion and sediment control. So say you want to develop an acre of land and you want to convert that over into some type of shopping center, for instance. That would generate a lot of sediment and runoff of that property, and so the EPA has authority to regulate such types of activities. But they have delegated that authority to the state of Kentucky, which issues a KYR 10 construction permit. And so if your project is an acre, you'd have to apply for that permit. But it's a little bit more complicated. So there's also a general permit that's given to MS4 communities. So that's municipal separate sewer systems, storm sewer systems. And so if a community is large enough to have one of those permits, then they will have a local ordinance in place, and they will be doing the enforcement of that. So you can see how there's these jurisdictions and primacy plays out and can be confusing as far as who's in control. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of some of the issues that are being balanced here, and I want to look more in depth at Kentucky's communities, specifically their cities. There's 418 incorporated cities in the state, and that's about half of the Kentucky's population lives in the city. And a lot of that, Louisville and Lexington contain about 24% of the state's population. Okay, so I mentioned before that 1891 Constitution. Under that Constitution, there were 6 classes of cities based on population, and there were laws that were specific to each one of those classes. Because remember, only the state government had the authority to make these rules. There was no local government rules. And this system was only repealed in 1994, okay? There was a constitutional amendment that was proposed in 1980. It was ratified in 1994, and cities and counties were granted home rule, meaning they can manage their affairs as they see fit, as long as it doesn't conflict with the Constitution or state law. But prior to 2015, there was an arbitrary classification system based on that population size. So when they rolled back and they gave home rule in 1994, they did not put in a different system to replace those statutory requirements about the different city sizes. And so there was still a classification of 6 different classes. And so in 2014, a third of the cities were improperly classified. So it wasn't in 2015 in which that classification system was dropped. So you'll still see in a lot of GIS databases of references to a city class. Again, in 2015, it was changed, and now there's only 2 classes. Louisville is a first class city, and then all other cities in the state are under home rule. So here is a map that shows the 418 class of incorporated cities within the state, and you can see some of the different sizes and distribution. But more than anything, I just want to see where these cities are located. Cities are managed in different ways, one of 3 ways. Now, Louisville and Lexington are a little bit different because they are a merged urban county government system. But otherwise, there's a mayor-council system, so that's the majority are managed in that way. There's a city commission, which is the other most dominant. That's 42%. But then there's a city manager type of operation, which is 5%, but it's a lot of the larger cities. And so understanding how cities are structured will help you know how to approach issues in them. Okay, what you see here are the 3 different types of plans. So on the left, you see the mayor council form. And so again, this is more than half of the cities in the state. And so the mayor has broad executive authority and veto power, while the council has legislative authority. So the mayor presides over the council meetings, but only votes if it's in a tie. And the size of that council can vary between 6 and 12 representatives based upon the city class. Okay. So in a mayor council plan, you may need to work with the mayor as well as the council member that's associated with your specific district in that city in order to advocate for your projects. This is in addition to any type of administrative department that deals with water type issues, and which should be your first contact at that city. So Louisville and Lexington, even though they're an urban county government situation, they're very similar to this mayor council plan. Lexington has a 15-person council with 12 that are representing districts. Louisville has 26 districts, each represented by a council member. The second form is a commission form of government. And so in this case, all the legislative, executive, and administrative powers of the city are in the city commission, which includes the mayor as well as 4 elected city commissioners. The mayor will preside over these meetings and has full voting capacity, but they have limited additional responsibilities. So in this case, the mayor is kind of more of a leader of that commission. But what's under this form of government, the city departments are placed under the supervision of one of the city commissioners, unless that city has created a city administrative officer. That's only like 5% of these. So you will need to find who is the commissioner that is that is overseeing the water issues for any type of, if you're going to seek additional support on a project. So a city manager is the last form, which you have a mayor and then 4 different commissioners who make up the board of commissioners. The distinction is that significant administrative powers are vested to a city manager, which is a position the Board of Commissioners must establish. The manager can serve an indefinite term and has the day-to-day supervision of all the different government departments. And so in a city manager plan, you may be best served talking to that city manager as well as the various administrative departments about planning issues. I want to look briefly at the city revenues and expenditures. These are from the Kentucky League of Cities. On the left, you see revenue, so income sources, and on the right, expenditures. And so first thing what you notice is that cities don't necessarily have a lot of spare pots of money lying around to do everything communities would like them to do. They have very specific revenue sources, and so external grants to fund projects are very appealing if you can bring in extra money into a community to address types of issues. Another note, you can see utilities occupy both a large part of income and expenses, but that percentage of expense is often greater for the utility than the income. And so if you can find ways, if you can appeal to ways you can reduce the cost of managing a utility, this would be of interest to a city. Okay, now we look at one of the things that makes Kentucky unique. So we turn from the city to the county, and so Kentucky has the third largest number of counties of any state. Only Texas and Georgia have more, and they're both larger. So the county is firmly entrenched in Kentuckians' identity, and it's a very strong level of government. And so counties can enact ordinances, they can issue regulations, levy taxes, issue bonds. Um, uh, so unless a state law otherwise provides for a city to set more stringent standards, county ordinances will hold sway throughout the county as well as in the city. Um, so the fiscal recorder is responsible to send the mayor of each city a copy of any ordinance that it passes, but sometimes there's tensions between cities and counties because of these ordinances and different perspectives that they might have on them. When we look at county government, we can see that most of the counties throughout the state have a magistrate system. However, a few of them have a commissioner system. Also, you note the two in Louisville and Lexington that have a unified city-county government. So in that magistrate system, which is by far the most dominant, you have a county judge executive who presides over a court that has somewhere between 3 and 8 justices of the peace, also known as magistrates, who preside over different districts. Under the commissioner systems, they don't represent different districts; they're at large. Okay, so that's a lesser number, but it's present. In both of these, excuse me, in 1975, the Constitution was amended so that justice of the peace and the county judge do not have judicial duties. And so that's why they're now known as the county judge executive. So they really serve as the executive branch of the county government. You can see in counties, you also have a number of shared elected officials. The one I'll note there is the PVA administrator, because oftentimes in watershed plannings, you need to reach out to these folks. Sometimes they have electronic documents, sometimes they have paper. And so working with that PVA administrator is often important. But that's at the county level. The fiscal court receives funding from a number of sources. Some of that includes property taxes or licensing fee or general taxes. They can also receive federal block grants, state taxes, and fees, as well as specific project grants. But these revenues are directed towards their many different functions. And so what I've identified here are some of the specific functions that are related to watershed planning. So you can see planning and zoning, you can see recreation and parks, you can see the county health board, emergency preparedness, floodplain management, county roads, water supply plans, and also waste disposal. And so participating at county fiscal court sessions, or even requesting to present information about the watershed plan may be very helpful in understand what's going on in your community and furthering your watershed planning goals. So we talked about the cities, we've talked about the counties, and now I want to look at special districts. There's actually about 40 different types of special districts within Kentucky. These are subdivisions of state government that are separate from counties or cities, and they often have their own taxes and fees. And so we all know about, for instance, school districts or maybe sanitation districts, but they can really cover a broad array of services. Some of the ones that I have listed here are focused on watershed related issues. In all these cases, they have a limited number of services and a limited geographical area. Some of these districts are very important for watershed coordinators to understand. And I'll also note that fiscal courts are involved in approving the creation of most special districts. The county judge executives generally makes appointments to the board of directors of most of these districts, and in some cases they can combine or abolish different types of districts with the court approval. And so the county judge executives can require these special districts to make detailed annual financial reports, but they don't get to oversee their business. And so beyond creating some of these districts or abolishing or maybe appointing, they have influence, but they do not regulate the day-to-day operation of most of these special districts. And there's also limits that are put in place to regulate the amount of control that they may have to protect that independent status. So let's look at some of these districts. The first are districts related to wastewater. And so there's many different types of organizations that have wastewater systems in Kentucky, but several are managed through special districts. So as of 2019, there was 423 wastewater plants in Kentucky. Of those, 243 were municipally owned and 180 were privately owned. And so of that 243 municipal systems, most of those are managed by cities or other entities, but you can see special districts are established for 56 of these different systems throughout the state. That includes one metropolitan sewer district, 5 joint sewer agencies, and then 50 sanitation districts. So a metropolitan sewer district was set up for sanitation with first-class cities, and Kentucky only has one, that's Louisville, and so that's the only place where that occurs. So that district's managed by a 7-member board that's appointed by the mayor and the county judge executive, but again, it operates separately. They can establish their own rates, rentals, and charges to be collected from property values within that area. A joint sewer agency is kind of like a metropolitan sewer district, but for 2nd to 6th class cities in that size. So it operates like this metropolitan sewer district, but through a merger of the city, the county, or the sanitation districts. So how that exact governance works is depending on the agreement between the local governments. And then lastly, a sanitation district is a little different in that it can address sanitary sewer as well as septic systems. You can have a sanitation district that focuses on on-site management or even stormwater if they want to prevent or correct stream pollution. It's governed by a 3-member board that's appointed by the judge executives, and the secretary of the Energy and Environment Cabinet acts as the commissioner over these districts and may establish them in the county with a petition. Okay, so these boards can levy property taxes is one of the functions that they have. So these different districts have different degrees of control by the city or local governments through the appointments, but again, they are separately managed utilities than those that may be part of the city government. So understanding how the wastewater is managed is important in what they can do or not do. Another area is water districts. So water districts or associations are actually the most common form of supplying water throughout Kentucky. You can see those in the dark blue and the light blue here. You can see there's also some investor-owned systems or municipal-owned city, like city or county systems that are present. But again, water districts or water associations are special districts that are created by the fiscal court. And they have reporting to the Public Service Commission they're responsible for reporting to the Public Service Commission for changes in rates and things like that. They have a 3 to 5 member board, and so water districts are very interested in source water protection efforts, and so they can be great partners to work with on a watershed plan and implementation. Um, Two others that will kind of group together would be flood control districts as well as river port authorities. There's actually not a state GIS layer that I could find for the flood control districts in the state, but there are several located throughout, such as in Spencer and Harris County. These can be created by the Secretary of the Energy Environment Cabinet, and their goal is just to control and operate flood control works or levees. Riverport creations are approved through the Transportation Cabinet, and they're located, as you can see in the map there, for the most part along the Ohio River. They're looking at the commerce related to riverports and navigation. So these can be helpful if you're working within those areas, but remember, they have a separate board and governance. All counties are required to designate a solid waste management area or district, but they're their own entity. Okay, so you have a solid waste management district. How they're governed in each county, it's varied based on uh, the specific county, but their goal is to develop resource materials to aid in the waste planning process. So think about trash and litter. Um, so in addition to assisting with like planning, annual reports, solid waste permitting, developing ordinances, in addition to all those different duties, one of their duties is to support environmental education and outreach efforts for communities. And so working with these coordinators should, in most cases, be an essential part in any plan that has a litter issue, which is quite a few of them. You can find out where your solid waste coordinator, their contact information. The Division of Waste Management has a website. If you look for recycling and local assistance, they have a list of all those coordinators throughout the state. Finally, I just want to, at a state level, want to mention the ag-related special service districts. We're going to talk about that more so in the ag overview. But the Cooperative Extension Service through UK and Kentucky State is actually a special district located in each county, and as well as the Soil and Water Conservation District or conservation districts. They have their own board of elected officers, and they have authority over a broad range of natural resource conservation type issues. Two kind of like sub districts under that are the agricultural districts, that's focusing on protecting from annexation from cities, as well as watershed conservation districts, which is focusing on water conservation, but also flood control and sediment issues. Now I just want to transition in the few remaining minutes that we have to these regional and multi-state authorities. I want to mention area development districts. There's 15 throughout the states, and they are involved in all kinds of different aspects of local governments. The reason why they're created is they're intended to be catalysts between local and state leaders to kind of address some of these regional issues. So ads are a great resource for grant writing and planning services. You can see some of the things they offer. Local economic developments, health and human services, water sewer planning, public management, and technology support. So as far as water projects, they help to rank out state revolving fund projects. They can help build GIS systems. They also help put together hazard mitigation grants. We're going to have a presentation from them. I think you're going to find they're amazing resources. They're governed by board. It's typically of the mayors and the county judge executives in the area. Most of them have an executive director, and then they have regional planning councils within that. So if you're not involved with your area development district, you should be. They're great resources for planning activities and very well connected. So they can give you a perspective on different issues with utilities and struggles they may be having in a community. We also mentioned briefly for those that are in the Kentucky River drainage, there is the Kentucky River Authority that's established to help maintain the locks and dam structures along the Kentucky River, but also to protect and improve the waters of Kentucky River. And so they have some grant programs and support volunteer monitoring activities in that basin. There's also Orsenco is a multi-state authority that's established in 8 different states that's just focused on standard settings for tributaries of the Ohio River. So they're looking at setting standards, performing assessments, and then conducting special surveys. So they're a great resource if you're looking for data in some of those areas along the Ohio River. For those in Western Kentucky, the Delta Regional Authority is an 8 state authority. You can see the counties there on the right that are located in Kentucky. So mostly in the 4 rivers or Green River basins. And they're focused on regional economic opportunities, but they have those in kind of 4 different buckets. Basic public infrastructure improvement, transportation infrastructure, business development, and workforce development. So if you're looking for funding for some infrastructure or a project that can help increase economic opportunity, that may be a source of funding in Western Kentucky. And in Eastern Kentucky, you have the Appalachian Regional Commission, which kind of serves a similar goal. It's looking at economic opportunities, a ready workforce, some critical infrastructure, natural and cultural assets, and then leadership within the community, increasing that capacity. So for funding water, wastewater infrastructure, some economically driven type water improvement projects, these can be a source of funding there. So a lot of information again. I hope you all enjoyed it, but the main takeaway is location, 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 right? Each community is a little bit different. So the better that you can get to know those local resources, the better you can serve them through watershed planning. So